Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. Hurricane Milton made landfall near Sarasota as a Category 3 hurricane, tearing through the state and leaving a trail of destruction and devastation in its wake. But as bad as this storm was, it could have been much worse. Nevertheless, the economic effects of the storm will likely be felt for a very long time on all of us. Will Milton, along with Helene, worsen the insurance crisis in Florida? I think we already know the answer to that, but what, if anything, can the state do about it? Those were the issues I wanted to address today, and I could not think of a better person to have that discussion with than former State Senator Jeff Brandes. While many of his Republican colleagues spent their time on restricting abortion or passing laws to ban books or worrying about drag queen brunches, Brandes always seemed focused on issues that matter to the people most. He now leads a think tank here in the state, the Florida Policy Project.
This is obviously could have been a lot worse had it come just 20 or 30 miles north and impacted Tampa Bay. It would have been radically worse. That's really the worst case scenario for the Tampa Bay market. So I think it's probably a $30 billion event overall. I think you will see attached at the Cat Fund level, at the Florida to the Florida Cat Fund level. But I think obviously it could have been a lot worse.
And what does that mean? So break that down a little bit. If you're looking at like a $30 billion event, that's both a hit to citizens and to the private insurance companies. So citizens probably did not get as hurt in this storm as they could have been. It's probably more on the burden of private insurers this time around, correct?
That's correct. I mean, Citizens has a huge percentage of policies in the Tampa Bay area, specifically Pinellas County and Hillsborough County. But as this storm moved through, you get more and more private insurers involved. And so I think it's probably about a $5 billion hit to Citizens and probably a $25 billion hit to the rest of the industry.
So a $5 billion hit to Citizens, they can absorb that. I think they can handle
absolutely.
That, correct?
This will use about half their surplus. So they still have funds for another storm this year if there is another one, but that uses about half the citizen surplus and probably a substantial portion of the CAT funds, the Catastrophe Fund of the state of Florida's resources as well.
And for the private insurance companies, some of whom the state has slowly been trying to lure back in, what's the impact on them likely to be?
Well, I think it'll be meaningful, but I don't think this is not a death blow to any of the private insurance companies. I don't think any of them will fail from this storm. Probably could have another storm and probably say that of equal size, but it will be a significant impact. I think it probably keeps rates from going down next year. This is the kind of the storm we were we were concerned about that would probably prohibit rates from dropping that much. I still think you probably will see a 1 to 5% reduction in rates. I think Tallahassee will be putting their heavy hand on insurance companies to figure out a way to lower rates next year.
I've seen some estimates that maybe 90% of the people in the state of Florida don't have flood insurance. And so talk to me about how flood insurance plays here and what's likely to happen going forward. Because Citizens, as you told me previously, requires you to have flood insurance. A lot of private insurers don't, but you think they're going to start heading that way.
I do. In fact, there's some announcements of private insurers, I think, that are coming out in the next week or so that have said that they're going to require their customers to have flood insurance going forward. Listen, when you have storms like this, what you realize is how many people are operating without flood insurance. I think even after Helene, we're finding only 25% of the people in the kind of what we consider flood zone prone areas have flood insurance. And it's devastating for individuals to find out that their property insurance doesn't cover flood insurance. And almost all of the property insurance companies that operate in Florida don't have a flood insurance that operates with as far as part of that policy. So people have to go out and buy separate flood insurance. Nobody in Florida is more than 70 miles from the coast. Everybody in Florida needs flood insurance. These storms highlight that fact, that if there's one big takeaway after these storms, it's the challenge that we have if you have property insurance and not flood.
Let's take a step back for a second, because also the issue that I always find between the challenges of windstorm and flood, or basically wind and water, is the windstorm carriers tend to want to say, well, this is a flood issue, and the flood issue The flood carriers want to say, well, it's actually a windstorm issue, and you do a lot of finger pointing back and forth. And I guess what I'm trying to figure out too is, given some of the reforms that the legislature has made in recent years, specifically with the belief that there needed to be tort reform, that there needed to be limits on the amount of litigation brought against insurance companies, that there was a feeling that Florida was too litigious. And that may be the case, but I'm wondering if we're about to start realizing the full effects of those changes, in that as people try to file claims against insurance companies, try to sue insurance companies, they're going to have a lot harder time now in Florida.
Well, I think Milton is the first real test of the new law. I don't think it was Helene. Helene was largely a flood event. But I think Milton will be the first new test of this law, but it's also the first new test of the legislature's new requirements on adjusting for property insurance companies. So property insurance companies now have a certain timeline that they have to make contact, that they have to adjust claims in. And unless the governor waives that, which he may, then that's really a new test for them as well. But I think we'll see how ultimately this plays out. But to your point, I would imagine most of the claims that are still open from Hurricane Ian are that flood versus wind controversy between insurance companies, who's responsible for what. And ultimately, that's why I think people need flood insurance, because you need, no matter who, somebody's going to be responsible for it. What you don't want to be is with a flood, with a property insurance policy that doesn't cover flood and have flood damage.
One of the things you talked about with the Office of Insurance Regulation, do you think that the office, OIR as it's known, do you think they do an aggressive enough job, that they are on top of these things, that they are holding the insurance company accountable?
I think that they have made a strategic shift to doing that going forward. I think you've seen fines coming out of OIR for claims handling practices. We had historically not seen that. So I think they have made a strategic shift now, and I think they're dedicating an appropriate amount of resources to ensure there is appropriate oversight. I know even before this storm came out, they were asking policy companies for what they believe their estimated damage was, and I think there will be incredible accountability now by OIR to ensure that the reforms that the legislature passed are implemented.
All right. Anything more you want to talk about that I haven't had a chance to?
No, I think I think this could have been a lot worse. This is a substantial storm for Florida, but this is a manageable storm for Florida. I think Florida does disaster recovery better than any state in the country. I think the governor has dedicated an immense amount of resources to getting power back on, to getting debris removed. I think we're going to see the legislature continue to make some changes. But I think the insurance industry is radically stronger than it was 2 years ago under Hurricane Ian. New standards have come into place that they're going to have to conform to as far as claims adjusting. And I think that they are dedicating the appropriate amount of resources to get things adjusted. I think one thing that isn't being talked about is the effect of Helene on the overall industry. So think about this. You have adjusters in Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia that are up there. It's difficult to get enough adjusters right now in Florida. And this is something I think is going to have to be addressed, is what kind of resources can we really bring to bear? If we have 700,000 to 1 million claims, that's really problematic. And I think we're going to have to work to address that.
Are there issues that the legislature should take up next year with regard to this? Are there solutions from a legislative perspective?
Look, I think the number one thing that the legislature should be doing and working towards is what else can we do to incentivize people to get flood insurance? Whether that's education, incentives, flood insurance has become, by these two storms, the number one issue now one of the top issues faced in Florida is the lack of flood insurance for coastal properties. We've got to address that. We've got to have the tools to address that. And Florida, more than any other state, is being shown to be vulnerable for inland flooding and frankly, even freshwater flooding.
When we come back, the race for House District 106, we will talk to Joe Saunders, who is looking to oust Republican Fabian Basabi. Stay with us. Welcome back. In 2022, when Democrats stayed home and Ron DeSantis won the state by 19 points, Republican Fabian Basabe rode that wave and won a seat in the Florida House representing District 106, which includes Miami Beach, North Bay Village, and runs all the way up to Aventura. Basabe won that election by just 240 votes out of more than 52,000 cast. Basabe's win in a Democratic-leaning district surprised a lot of people because many had written him off as a boorish clown who starred in a reality TV show, Filthy Rich Cattle Drive, with one of the Kardashians. And to be honest, for a long time, it seemed Basabe was more interested in becoming a Kardashian than a politician. He made tabloid headlines for Dirty Dancing with then First Daughter Barbara Bush in 2004. The Washington Post described him as the male equivalent of Paris Hilton. The Miami Herald noted that in 2016, Basabe was charged with disorderly conduct for climbing on the roof of a car and yelling at pedestrians on South Beach, telling police at the time he wanted to make a fabulous entrance to Club Twist, according to the incident report. In 2019, the New York Post reported accusations he berated a publicist who wouldn't let him into a party, allegedly calling her the N-word, a charge he denies. Which brings us to where we are today. In 2022, he ran for a state house seat, largely financing his own campaign. And because he was running on Miami Beach, he campaigned as a moderate who would support the gay community. But as soon as he got to Tallahassee, he voted consistently with Ron DeSantis' culture war policies, including voting to expand the so-called Don't Say Gay law. When the 6-week abortion ban was voted on in the House, he just didn't show up for the vote, opting to stay in his office at the time. But he has been also accused by 2 former male aides of sexual harassment. Basabe denied the claims, and an investigation by the House failed to find any evidence, direct or circumstantial, that he violated state policies, but noted that Basabe likely should exercise better judgment regarding observing the delicate margins between the personal and professional with his subordinates and their friends in the future. Now, those former aides are suing Basabe, which brings us to this year's election. Democrats are mounting an aggressive challenge to Basabe, and the candidate hoping to replace him is here with us now. Joe Saunders is a former member of the State House in the Orlando area from 2012 to 2014 as the policy director for Equality Florida. Joe, thank you very much for coming in.
Quite an introduction, Jim.
Yes. Well, you know, and so much of that has to do with the issues with Fabian Basabe, and we'll talk about those. But I want to start with what you want to do. So why are you running for this seat, and what are you hoping to do if elected?
Well, with my very limited time, I just want to first thank you for inviting me to be here. This is a seat that's been sat in by some pretty iconic people in Florida politics. It's a privilege to be here with you. My name is Joe Saunders. I'm the Democrat running to represent this community, to represent Miami Beach and all the way up to Aventura, Miami-Dade's coastal communities in the Florida House of Representatives. And my career has been a 20-year career as a nonprofit executive working at the intersection of civil rights and voting rights and public health. And really important issues to the community like gun safety reforms and gun violence prevention. I've been going back and forth to the Capitol for 20 years. 2 of those years was as a state lawmaker from the Orlando area, which is where I went to college. I grew up here in South Florida. And 18 have really been as an outsider, working to shift policy in a process that is opaque at best and often antagonistic to normal people. So I got off the sidelines and decided to run this year because I think that the district I live in and have lived in since 2018, the district that includes Miami Beach, deserves representation that matches our values, that will vote in alignment with the values of the community that we come from, and not just be a rubber stamp for manufactured culture wars instead of real bipartisan solutions to the problems we all face.
So let's talk about some of those problems. Obviously, we have an insurance crisis in the state. We have an affordability crisis. Give me your thinking. Tell me, obviously, as a Democrat, there's a limited amount that you can do in the Republican legislature, but what should the state be doing? What should the legislature be doing, in your opinion?
Well, let's talk about property insurance. We've just gotten through two catastrophic storms in this state, two storms that Governor Ron DeSantis said we better all knock on wood and hope don't come while the supposed reforms that we've seen in the Capitol take effect. I think that what we've seen out of the Capitol on property insurance reform, this are two special sessions in 2 different years where policy could pass. I could summarize it real quickly for you, Jim. $1 billion bailout to the reinsurance industry, limiting the access of normal people to the courts when a shady insurance company won't pay their fees, a weakening of insurance, and an absolute refusal to require a lowering or even a freezing of rate increases. What we're doing is not working, and I think what we need is real bipartisan solutions and really bold thinking. There's a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers that have stepped up to call for a big idea that deserves to be vetted in the Capitol, to strengthen citizens, to stop thinking of it and faking our state out and making folks think that it continues to be the public insurer of last resort. Maybe it should be the insurer of first resort when it comes to hurricane coverage, and that might be the kind of bold thinking that really resets this industry.
All right, and there was a point I wanted to make at the outset of our discussion. I had hoped to have a debate between you and Fabian Basabe, and Fabian had initially expressed interest in wanting to debate and then finally just refused to come on. So that's why we're having you here today, because Fabian wouldn't come on and debate you, which I think is problematic. But that's his choice. I can't make him, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to have this discussion. So I want to go, though, to some of his votes, because these are some of the questions I would have asked him had he been here. So, for instance, you talk about gun safety. So one of the bills that I know that he voted for was House Bill 543, which allows for permitless carry in the state of Florida. Now in the state of Florida, you don't need a concealed weapons permit any longer. You used to. And the benefit of the concealed weapons permit program was that in addition to actually understanding who's carrying guns in a concealed manner, it also required you to take a class and go through some modest training, be able to get the permit. He voted to do away with all that. How would you have voted on that?
I would have voted no. I also would have voted no on the bill he voted yes for 2 years in a row that repealed the gun safety laws that were passed by students from Stoneman Douglas High School, who came from Parkland just a few weeks after that tragedy in the middle of the night to drive up to Tallahassee to fight for common sense, bipartisan gun safety reforms. My opponent voted twice to give teenagers access to assault rifles again. He's proud of his NRA endorsement. I think that's horrifying, and I think it's deeply out of alignment with this district. You know,
I just want to, let me just hold you there, because I want to stay on this point about the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas bill. I mean, you correctly say this was a huge bipartisan victory. Republicans, Democrats came together, passed not just raising the age for those sorts of weapons to 21, but also red flag laws, which would allow for seizure of weapons from individuals who are a threat to themselves or others through the court system. He voted twice to do away with that. Now, neither of those bills passed because the Senate, in each case, killed those bills. But he voted to repeal, to do away with those laws both times.
So the bill that was brought by some of the most extreme pro-gun members of the legislature was not a full repeal. So it didn't include the red flag laws that you mentioned, but it was a repeal of the new age restrictions. And effectively what it said is that Rep. Basabe, my opponent, voted twice that teenagers should again have access to assault rifles, that they should have a right to buy guns, including long guns. And I just think in the environment we live in today, nobody agrees that by Democrats, Republicans, NPAs, any reasonable person understands that that is the worst kind of extremism. And I think it's why he earned the NRA's endorsement, but I think it's out of step with what the community I come from.
I want to turn to abortion. As I said in the introduction, he just didn't show up and vote. Like he just was absent when the 6-week ban was being voted on.
Well, I'm going to correct you on one small part of that. So he was not present in the chamber. He was sitting in his office at the time of the final vote. But what's really important for voters in my district to understand is that Rep. Basabe was there on the floor when 50 amendments were brought to mitigate the extremism of the 6-week abortion ban. So amendments that would have strengthened exemptions for women and girls who've been victims of sexual assault. he voted no on those amendments. So in every vote that he had a chance to stand up, turn his microphone on, and defend the agency and autonomy of women and girls in this state, to stand up against the intervention of government in the lives and the private decision-making of women and girls in this state, he voted no on the amendments, and then he took a walk.
He also voted for the bill that prevents local municipalities, counties, and cities from passing extreme heat measures. So Miami-Dade County, for instance, had an ordinance that wanted to try to protect individuals who are workers who are out in extreme heat. We're seeing the effects of climate change. We're seeing what this can do. So putting in some standards to be able to protect workers. He voted on a bill. It was, I can't remember the name of the bill right now. I think it was 543. No, it was a different bill. But he voted to basically prevent any city or county from passing laws to protect workers from extreme heat.
Correct. In an environment in Miami-Dade County, in an environment where we are seeing record level heats, and that, was also included in that bill, Jim, was a ban on living wage ordinances. A simple local ordinance that Miami-Dade County passed that said that they could require that contractors who come, Miami-Dade County has a $9 billion budget, a provision that said if you take one of our contracts, we're going to ask you to match what we do with our employees for your employees and offer them a living wage. That same bill robbed the ability of local governments across the state to create basic living wage ordinances in addition to these heat stress protections. This district that I'm running for and that he represents today is home to 10 cities. These cities deserve the right to decide how they grow, how they shape, and when Tallahassee won't solve a problem and local government steps up to fill that gap, the right thing to do is to learn from them, create it at the state level, not repeal their right because a bunch of special interests and big moneyed corporations go up to Tallahassee and buy a new law.
So the argument could be made that despite his voting record, it's better to have a Republican in that seat because a Republican is more likely to be able to get funding for groups and entities in the district than a Democrat will. How would you address that?
I think that's fundamentally not true. If you look at what the last 2 years have been, despite what my opponent would say, I'm sure if he was here and was willing and brave enough to come debate me in front of your viewers with you, he would make that argument. And my response would be that that's not what the budget shows, and it's not what I believe happened. I think that my opponent did manage to leverage his time as a member of the majority for his first year. And then after a number of scandals that you've covered here on your show and that you talked about in your intro, was completely sidelined by the majority. We had members from other districts who were fighting for funding for our district. That is not leadership. And there's a strong record of Democrats in this district getting the funding that they need for the cities and the important projects.
All right, Joe, I got to end it there. Thank you very much for coming in. All right, we'll be right back after the break. Some important news. CBS Miami is happy to announce that we will be hosting a debate between the candidates for Miami-Dade County Sheriff live on Tuesday from 7 to 8 p.m. And the following night at 7 p.m. we will host a debate on Amendment 3, the amendment to legalize marijuana for anyone over the age of 21. Now, I'll be moderating both debates, and I hope you will join us. They are going to be, well, let's say, interesting. And for the next 3 Sundays, Facing South Florida will be expanding to an hour as we head into Election Day. We have lots to cover, and we're going to start it each Sunday going forward at 8 a.m. Well, that's all the time we have for today. If you have any thoughts or comments, feel free to contact me at jdefede@cbs.com. I do enjoy hearing from you. Thanks again for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.